Hello everyone, my name is Morgan Robinson. I am a school-based mental health therapist with Access Counseling. I've been working with Access for about a year and a half now, and today's presentation is going to focus on autism, including signs of a potentially autistic child, the criteria needed to have that diagnosis, and ways to support an autistic child who may be in your classroom if they are not quote-unquote severe enough to be in special education classes. So our learning objectives for today, I'm going to be giving you a brief overview of what autism is and autism spectrum disorder, and again, signs of autism in your classroom and what to do if you suspect that a student may have autism, and then how autism is relevant for SEL standards. And I'll be going over this in a while, but we're going to be focusing more on skills on how to support autistic students. So I want to emphasize that the things being presented here today are not all-inclusive, and I strongly encourage y'all to learn more at these websites. These websites helped me put this presentation together today, and there was an abundance of information on supporting autistic students in different roles, so like bus drivers, school admin, staff, and custodians. So please, I invite you to visit autismspeaks.org or autisticadvocacy.org for more information. So what is autism? Autism is comprised of three main aspects, including difficulties with communication, difficulties with social interaction, and repetitive behaviors. This last point here I think is very important, that people living with autism spectrum disorder are born with the disorder and will have it for life. I'm going to be touching on this later again in this presentation. Because autistic people are born with the disorder and they will have it for life, our focus needs to be on supporting these individuals rather than trying to change them. They cannot change who they are, but we can change in the ways that we interact with them, and we can support by advocating for them as well. Here I have listed the DSM-5 criteria for a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. I won't sit here and read through the criteria verbatim, but I did want to include it because it provides some examples of what behaviors might be indicative of autism. So if we're looking at the second bullet point of persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction, we have the examples of abnormal social approach and failure of normal back and forth conversation. There's deficits in nonverbal communicative behaviors used for social interaction. So poorly integrated verbal and nonverbal communication, abnormalities in eye contact and body language, or deficits in like understanding the use of certain nonverbal gestures, and then also deficits in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. So having difficulty with adjusting behaviors to suit various social contexts. So on this slide, I've included the restrictive repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. So that includes the stereotyped or repetitive motor movements. So when we think about an autistic person, we might have a stereotype in our head. For example, an autistic person might engage in headbanging, but not every person with autism will engage in headbanging. There's an insistence on sameness, so it's very difficult to deal with transitions or difficult to handle small changes in a routine. There's the highly restricted fixated interests, so having a strong attachment to a particular subject or even an object, so like an autistic person being extremely interested in rocks. That might not be something that a non-autistic person is typically interested in. And that topic that they're interested in could range and vary from person to person. And then we've also got the hyper or hyporeactivity to sensory input. And so they might have exaggerated responses to pain or temperature as compared to a non-autistic person. So they might be indifferent to it, they might find it extremely painful, when to a non-autistic person it might not even be that painful. And then they also have adverse reactions to sounds and textures most often. So each student with autism is unique, but there are some similarities between them. And as we move through each of these points, it's important to remember that autism occurs on a spectrum. So some people living with autism may need a lot of assistance with daily living, while others may only need a little bit of help. Some people with autism are able to speak, while others may need to use a different way to communicate with others. So while they think, process, and communicate differently from non-autistic people, just remember that the severity is going to differ from person to person. So the information provided on this slide is from the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. So with thinking differently, people living with autism may have a particular interest in a topic that other people may not seem to care about as much. But autistic people put a great deal of energy and time towards learning more about that topic. Some may pay great attention to details, and they could potentially take longer periods of time to think things through. And some may have issues with executive functioning as far as their decision-making skills and figuring out how to start and finish tasks. Routines are very important for autistic people, and it can be difficult for them to adjust to transitions or even surprises. So I can't even imagine how they had to cope with COVID-19 and the shutdowns and transitioning to online instruction for school. With processing senses differently, autistic people are often sensitive to loud noises or bright lights or anything that may overload their senses. They may not realize when they are in pain or even if they are hungry. Oftentimes, to help regulate their senses, they will do repeated movements called stimming, which you might see if someone is rocking back and forth or playing with their hands or maybe even humming. With moving differently, they have difficulty with fine motor skills, difficulty with starting and stopping movement. They have an inability to control how loud they are. And they have difficulty with speech because it requires a lot of coordination, but they can still hear us when we speak. And then with communicating differently, echolalia is repeating things that one has heard before. Autistic people may also script out what they want to say to someone. They may also use other types of communication, especially if they have difficulty with speech. So they might use their behaviors like playing charades or pointing to pictures or using a whiteboard to talk about the things they need to discuss with someone. And socializing differently. Autistic people have difficulty understanding social rules. Eye contact may feel uncomfortable. They might be more direct than non-autistic people. There's difficulty with controlling facial expressions and body movement, which can make socializing with non-autistic people very difficult. Let's see, some autistic people may not be able to guess how others are feeling, and this does not mean that they do not care. If you don't tell an autistic person how you are feeling, they will not know. And this goes back to difficulty with understanding social situations, and this includes others' feelings. And finally, potentially needing help with daily living. It can take a lot of energy for autistic people to complete daily living tasks like cooking, cleaning, doing jobs, and going out, due to our society and world around us being built by non-autistic people. So autistic people may need time in between tasks to rejuvenate their energy, or their autism could prevent them from doing these tasks at all. So each and every person living with autism is unique, and not everyone may relate to the things mentioned here. It's important to remember that it is a spectrum, especially when it comes to daily functioning. So what would autism look like in the classroom? Students with severe autism are more than likely already diagnosed and placed in special education classrooms to better meet their needs. There are physical characteristics that typically define someone living with autism, including a wide forehead and eyes that are closer together compared to non-autistic students. However, there could be a chance that an autistic student's physical features are so subtle that it may go unnoticed and therefore undiagnosed. So what do you do if you suspect one of your students may have autism? If you know they are set up with Access Counseling school-based therapists, you might consider collaborating with them to discern whether or not the therapist has also observed some of the same features. And if they have, you can recommend a referral be made for a formal assessment, which can be completed at CDC Behavioral Center. If they are not already set up with a therapist to your knowledge, you may make a referral through your front desk staff to be assessed by one of our therapists who will then make the referral, or you may speak with the parents directly about what you have observed. The parents may be able to go to CDC directly to make an appointment, or they may get in faster if they are able to complete an intake appointment with Access, and the therapist then makes the referral. So if a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder or ASD is reached, you can then reach out to school staff responsible for setting up IEP meetings or however your school helps kiddos with getting their needs met to ensure they are getting their accommodations, whatever those need to be. So to find out if a kiddo has a diagnosis of ASD, as long as there is an active release of information on file with Access or whoever conducted the assessment, you are able to speak directly with the kiddo's providers. Parents or guardians are also usually pretty good about bringing in their documentation as well. For more tips about what autism might look like in your classroom, I invite you to visit autismspeaks.org, where you can request a kit online to receive information on how to continue supporting students with autism. So by its very definition, people living with autism struggle in their daily lives with social interactions and cues. Also, as mentioned earlier, it can be difficult for autistic people to regulate their emotions. So rather than going through the SEL standards, I am going to go through skills that may be helpful in supporting autistic students as they continue to learn and grow. The goal is not to change an autistic student into a quote-unquote normal student. The goal is for those of us who may only have limited contact with autistic students, learning how to support and advocate for them. This support and advocacy will in turn address those SEL standards, as they are also working with other members of their treatment teams. So whether it be like an occupational therapist, a speech therapist, what have you, to learn and reinforce these skills. So with supporting communication, as we went over earlier, autistic students may require a different way of communicating with others, especially if they struggle with speech. So what this means for non-autistic people is patience and maybe clarifying questions or changing our wording if needed. If you are going to provide instructions to an autistic student, be sure to have their attention before giving out the directions. Use their name often and give directions in short and direct sentences. So rather than saying, take this note down to the front office and then take this note to another teacher's room and then go to the library to grab this book, you might just say, take this note to the front office and come back. And then when they come back, giving the rest of your instructions. Also, allow for some time to wait for the student to process your directions. Don't automatically say the direction again if you notice they are pausing. Their brains take just a tad bit longer to process what you said. Also, when providing instructions, try to avoid the words stop and don't, and provide them with exactly what you want them to do rather than saying, quote, don't walk out of line or stop getting out of line. So you might say, please stay in line. It will also be helpful to avoid reprimanding or punishing an autistic student for not listening or paying attention. This can induce shame and insecurity and reminding them that they do not have the same abilities as others. Again, the goal is not to change them, but to support and advocate for them. And lastly, you may consider using pictures or other devices to help with giving instructions. With supporting expressive language, to enhance an autistic student's learning of emotions, it will be helpful to use language that's focused on emotions. So rather than calling out a behavior, you might consider putting a label to how you think they may be feeling. For example, if you notice maybe some acting out behaviors or head banging or any other form of self-harm, you might say, I see that you're angry right now. This can help with them feeling validated, in addition to them knowing they conveyed to you what they want to convey to you. With supporting social skill development, you may consider pairing an autistic student with a non-autistic one for modeling social skills and to just help them feel less alone and knowing they have a buddy they can go to if they're in moments when they need a friend. Be sure this peer is willing to learn more about autism without judging any behaviors they may or may not see when interacting with this student. Additionally, when you are interacting with an autistic student, it's important to have boundaries and to ensure that they know what your boundaries are. Remember, autistic people do not always pick up on nonverbal social cues, so we need to be able to be direct about our boundaries. For example, sometimes when you notice a person is standing too close to you, you might take a step back. For an autistic person, they might just move closer to you because they don't understand that they are maybe too close and that you feel uncomfortable with them being too close. Um, Typically for a non-autistic person, they typically take that as their cue to, just kind of stay where they are. You're feeling too uncomfortable, and so that's why you moved away. So again, just be direct if they happen to be standing too close, just say, I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm going to take a step back, but you can stay where you are. Something along those lines. With addressing disruptive behaviors, this can be said about almost all children, but especially in autistic children, their behaviors are a form of communication. Intentionally think about what they may be trying to say through their behaviors. For example, if they start pounding their fists on the desk in the middle of a lesson, are they feeling overwhelmed and need a break? If you are noticing behaviors that indicate they may need a break, speak with them one-on-one, either before or after class, and help them come up with a plan on how to let you know they need a break, whether it be them raising their hand to step out for a minute or some other visual cue that is telling you what they need. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I know that this was a lot of information, but if you think one or more of your students might benefit from working with a therapist, go ahead and talk to your front office staff about how to get the referral process started. We will take care of the rest by getting in touch with the parents or guardians to get an intake appointment scheduled. So that's all I have for y'all. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please feel free to reach out to me directly, and I would be more than happy to connect with you. Continue doing great things, and good luck, everyone. Thanks.